I've learned, okay, am I reaching for that pill every single time, or am I making the core change that's needed so that that pill is not needed? So that's been the journey I've been on.
Empowering you organically, delivering content you trust with results you love.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Empowering You Organically. I'm your host, Jonathan Hunsaker, joined by my co-host, Terry-Ann Trevenin.
Hey everyone.
And we're also joined with a very special guest today, Leah Hawks. Leah, thank you for joining us.
Excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we go deep, Terry-Ann, do you want to read Leah's bio real quick?
Absolutely. The Sacred Plant is a mission-centered company started in April 2017. Since their beginning, their team has been dedicated to understanding, helping, and empowering patients, loved ones, caregivers, and more, helping to ignite the conversation around knowing there are powerful, natural, safe options for them to live a healthy, happy, and pain-free life. Leah Hawks is a founding team member holding the role of Director of Content. What is most important to note is the work she has done alongside the experts, patients, physicians, researchers, lawyers, nurses, advocates, and more to get an essential understanding of just how the sacred plant can make a difference in the lives of so many who once had lost hope.
So Terry-Ann, thank you for that bio. So let's talk about what is the sacred plant?
The sacred plant is ultimately the cannabis sativa, the overarching plant. And cannabis sativa breaks down into a multiple different viewpoints. Typically, we see it marijuana and hemp. And the only distinguishment there is the level of THC in it. And THC, as we know, is the psychoactive component, but it's also a medicinal component. So we don't want to cast it aside. And I know we'll get to more of that later today, but it really is cannabis, sativa, and then all the subcategories that fall underneath that.
Absolutely. And I know we've had guests on here on the past that we've talked about cannabis, we've talked about hemp. So our audience is probably somewhat familiar with it. And it's just more prevalent in the news now anyway. It's more mainstream than it's ever been in the past. And I just want to clarify for people, we're not here talking about marijuana, weed, Mary Jane, things like that. We're not talking about smoking it to get high. We're talking about cannabis. We're talking about the medicinal uses of cannabis. We're talking about CBD, cannabinoids. We're talking about all of the other angles of it. And also know, because I don't think a lot of people really realize that you can use cannabis without getting high, without that psychoactive effect.
Absolutely. And that all goes back to the way that you approach this, right? Just like how you approach your health and the way you eat, it's with methodology. It's with what is going to serve me the best. And you're going to approach the cannabis in the exact same way. How can I make this medicine serve me best with the limited side effects, no psychoactivity, the best results possible, right?
Absolutely. So Leah, give us a little background of you. I mean, what brought you to where you are now? Kind of, do you have a health journey yourself that has brought you to where you are today?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, to say the least. I honestly started on the track of really changing my life probably about 5 years ago. I had the gracious life thrown my way of meeting Manny Goldman, and he was transformative for me. He led me to believe that I had the ability to focus on myself. What does that mean? I can focus on my mental health, my physical health, my spiritual health, and all the in-betweens that come along with it. And so I was massively overweight. I was 285 pounds. I don't like to admit that, but I was. I had extreme anxiety, just panic attack after panic attack all the time. I was depressed, suicidal, just not in a good place. I was really in a toxic place because, again, I didn't know that I could take ownership of my own life. And that's literally where it started with. First and foremost, I accepted that I was responsible for myself and what came of myself. So I changed my diet. I changed my friend group. I changed the way that I was approaching my inner health. Like, was I constantly berating myself, or was I accepting where I am and choosing to step forward? All of that I've learned in the last 5 years. And because of it, my mental health is massively different. My ability to be effective in work is massively different. And on top of that, I've learned natural, safe options to include in my life. I've learned supplementation and how that benefits me. I've learned vitamins and what I'm deficient in and how can I supplement that. I've learned, okay, am I reaching for that pill every single time, or am I making the core change that's needed so that that pill is not needed? So that's been the journey I've been on. Like, it's uncomfortable. I'm still on that journey. It's never over. But that's the thing. And I think what's most exciting is I've learned and I've tripped and I've fallen. But through those trips and those falls, I've been able to learn even more. Like, if I did this perfectly, I probably wouldn't have learned as much as I learned. I really wouldn't have. The mistakes allowed me to see different things that I just wasn't aware of. And so now in turn, I can share this information. In turn, I've done it so I can share from my experience. Will my experience match everybody else's every time? Absolutely not. But one little piece might here and one little piece might there. And that's really what I'm about, is how can I continue to grow for myself and then in turn pour that back into the community.
Absolutely. No, and I can relate a lot, especially to the overweight part. I was 270 pounds. And what I like that you shared about your journey is it's not a perfect angle. It's like you're not just going to go perfectly right up the mountain or down the mountain, however you want to term it. There's always going to be hiccups. There's always going to be things, jagged edges, stuff that gets in the way along the way. And I think that's part of being able to be resilient and actually maintaining the change. I think if it's easy and you don't have that stuff, that's when you fall back to where you were before. So when you do a crash diet for a month and you lose 30 pounds and that's it, it was kind of hard for that month, but you didn't have enough time there to have some ups and downs in the longevity. It doesn't stay off as much as just, having to continue work on it. So thank you for sharing your story on that. Let's get back to CBD and THC. Can you just share a little bit more about those two compounds?
Absolutely. So CBD and THC are the most prominent. They're most concentrated in cannabis, in any type of cannabis. So whether or not you see the levels go up and down, they're still going to be the most found cannabinoids in the plant. And cannabinoids are just a very specific nomenclature for this particular type of phytochemical. It's just a part of the plant, easiest way to explain it. And so CBD and THC have each of their own benefits. So we see it going into our body through our endocannabinoid system, almost like a lock and a key, and it just fits right into place. And so CBD is known, typically known for anti-inflammation, anti-anxiety, energy boosting, and a variety of other things, including helping to stabilize cancer. So it keeps it in one spot. It doesn't allow it to spread. It helps with bone formation and density. There's a lot of different things CBD has been shown to do. And the reason why we know so much about CBD and why you hear it so many places, there's CBD water on the market, there's CBD leggings on the market, CBD tinctures and topicals, all those things. The reason why it's such a buzzword is because of how prominent it is, how easy it is to isolate, and because it has all these great attributes, right? Everybody's looking for the cure-all. At the end of the day, we all want it to be easy, and here's the next thing to try to get the cure-all. So that's something to be aware of, is don't jump ship to the isolates. So we'll come back to that if we get a chance to. The other side of it is THC. It gets the bad rep because of the psychoactivity, but the reality is THC is a powerhouse. They've proven time and time again in research that THC is actually able to kill cancer cells. Not directly, it actually kicks back on the natural process of apoptosis, which is natural cell death. Things have a timeline. Things should die at a certain point, and they should die naturally. And that's what THC kicks back on inside of our body. That's huge in and of itself. Not only that, it's been shown to be one of the strongest analgesics, so pain reliever. It's shown to help with muscle spasm, depression, help with whole body kind of relaxation, typically like muscle spasms or kind of inflammation-based pain, all those types of things. So these two things are 2 of 100, 100 plus actually. There's only 2 that we mostly focus on when there's a whole gang load of other cannabinoids and other chemicals actually in the plant that are so beneficial. And then when you bring it all together, I always explain it like this, right? Do you ever see that picture of the gentleman who's in front of the one tank and there's 4 tanks behind it? And it's like this huge monumental picture. Well, that's CBD by itself. Now let's put the whole group, the whole community in front of that tank. Do you think that tank's going to move forward as easily? Do you think that that tank's going to be able to trample? No, because now you have a whole front line of just everything blocking it. So that's how I always liken it, is that you want the whole brigade. You don't want one soldier. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I was just taking a pause there. So, so let's talk about that, because I think one thing that people need to understand too, because you talk about there's a whole lot more inside of the sacred plant itself. But going back to CBD and THC, I mean, a lot can matter based off of the ratios as well, right? For what you are trying to, I don't want to use the word cure, but whatever ailment you are trying to improve or make better. And so consider, you know, again, CBD doesn't have any of the psychoactive, so you can take just a straight CBD product, and that's great to a certain extent. Consider that you could do a 5-to-1, which means there's 5 parts CBD to 1 part THC. Now you're getting the benefits of the THC, but you're not getting any of the psychoactive in there because there's so much CBD versus the THC. You can do 1-to-1, you know, 1 CBD to 1 part THC. And it's interesting. And, you know, back when I was younger, as I think most people did, used to smoke weed and just get high from the THC. And so when it all comes back out again and you start actually learning more about it, learning the benefits, that you can actually take CBD to counteract the effects of THC. So if you've ever smoked in the past or, you know, eaten edibles or done things like that, and you're like, hey, that's way too much. You can also really manage your dose by adding more CBD to it. And again, I'm not talking about just the psychoactive part, but if you're needing some of the benefits that THC can give you, and you really want to make sure that you don't have any kind of psychoactive effect, you can add CBD to it to counteract all of that.
Absolutely. It's almost, Dr. Bierman, our pain expert, likens it to like a 3-to-1. 3 parts CBD to 1 part THC is kind of the tampering ratio. Is for every 3 parts of CBD, it eliminates the 1 full part of THC psychoactivity. Here's the kicker though. You have to be careful, because you don't want to get you mentioned this, you don't have so much CBD that you're actually completely smushing the effects of THC. You still want that, right? Especially, typically we see THC necessary in those more chronic or bigger, like kind of like life-threatening diseases or conditions or ailments. THC typically is used in those, whereas CBD and the other components can be more of a wellness protocol and a variety of other things. But yeah, you want to be careful of kind of like, if you get to a 20-to-1 CBD to THC, you're going to have very, very little effects of THC, but maybe that serves you, so that's okay. But it's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about the endocannabinoid system a little bit, and just talk about why these cannabinoids actually help us and how they can help us.
Absolutely. This, to me, kind of like blows my mind. In 1990, we accidentally discovered the endocannabinoid system, the ECS. I'll call it the ECS because it's way faster. And the point that they were trying to do was actually to see how THC was psychoactive and harmed us and caused detriment to our health. And then they found out, no, it's actually not. It's working very methodically inside of our body. And then they went even further. Well, that's so crazy, because THC doesn't just bounce around our whole body. It's going to very specific parts in our body. And that's how they discovered the cannabinoid receptors. So all that research led to us discovering that this particular system has been in mammals for over 500 million years, speculated, theorized, researched. And so this is not new. We just happened to accidentally discover it so late in our awareness of our body. And so what we did find out is that this system actually oversees all of our systems. So I've always had the question of like, how does our immune system know when to turn on and off? Or how does it know when it's too much or too little? Like what's the gauge? The ECS is the gauge. The ECS is kind of like the manager, so to speak, of the entire power plant. Each one has a place. Your janitorial team, you have your workers, you have your quality assurance team. You have all these pieces that play a role, and the ECS makes sure that you're in the right place at the right time. So it's there to help maintain homeostasis, which is harmony within our body, which is the ability to be adaptable to our environmental cues, whether it's toxins, whether it's our eating habits, or lack of exercise or excessive exercise, all these things, we're supposed to adapt to all that. And our ECS plays that role. And it also plays a role in repair and protection, neuroprotection, repair of cells that are damaged, drainage of our cells, so that way we get rid of all that stuff that needs to go away, right? The dead part of the cells and so on and so forth. It's telling when and where to turn it all on and off. Yes, no, more, less, all that. And the issue comes in, we call this endocannabinoid deficiency. We see this, it's speculated by Ethan Rousseau, who talks about these deficiencies inside of our body are what causes disease. Excessive over inflammation is a huge one. Nothing is turning it off. The systems are broken and nothing's turning that inflammation off. And it's kind of like pressurizing. So that's what's happening. So the way that cannabis plays a role, because this all has to connect at some point, is crazily enough, amazingly enough, cannabinoids fit perfectly inside of our endocannabinoid system, to the point where they almost mimic exactly what our natural endogenous neurotransmitters called endocannabinoids are doing inside of our body. So, and on top of that, they've shown that we've grown alongside this plant for at least 5,000 years. That's how far back we have in written format of how long we've been utilizing this as a potential relief or medicine. So what's great about this is you're literally supplementing with something that is very similar to what's already inside of your body. And even better, it stimulates your body to kick back into gear so that over time you don't need that cannabis anymore.
And that's what sorry, go ahead, Terry.
I'm going to jump in and go away from the physical side for a minute, because, you know, we're sitting on this podcast talking about this, but the reality is that this is still a very taboo conversation for many people. I think in the last several years, CBD has become such a big thing in the natural health space that so many people still don't understand it. I think a lot of people in the world still hear CBD and they think marijuana. I think like people don't even know the difference between CBD and THC, let alone do people understand that these are actually things that work in our bodies and work alongside with us. And these have been around for thousands of years. And, you know, as amazing as it is to hear all the benefits of what it can do for your body, and I think that's incredible, I think a lot of people listening and a lot of people hearing this for the first time are still maybe thinking like, this is still a taboo conversation. This is something that people are still fighting against. Like, we talk about this in the natural health space, Leah, you, Jonathan, myself, because like we've heard about this, we're educated on it, we're open-minded to it. But, you know, I think the very things you're talking about right here are still so controversial. The research is there to show that this is a beneficial thing for our bodies, that this is something that can really make an impact with our health. But I want to kind of backtrack out of the physical for a minute. We can talk about that more in a second. But with the sacred plant, when you're educating people, how do you bridge that gap? Because you're sitting here talking about this. You're talking about how, you know, it can really benefit people, how it can really impact our physical body in just massive ways, emotionally, mentally, physically. But let's talk for just a quick second. I know I'm going back away from how far down we've gone down this rabbit hole, but how at the Sacred Plant do you educate people and open their minds to the fact that this is something that's here to stay, and this is something that has been around for thousands of years? Because the reality is we have people listening right now who are like, CBD and THC are like, no, you can't do that. Like, even the word CBD, people are not educated on. So I want to just talk about that for a quick second, and then we can get back into the amazing physical factors of it. But how do you educate people when they come, you know, and find out about the Sacred Plant and you're educating them? How do you bridge that gap for people of misinformation and education to bring them to a place where they understand that this is actually, from all the things you're talking about right now, such an amazing thing for them, something that can really benefit them and help people be more open-minded?
Insanely valid question. I'm really glad you said that, because yeah, what's the point of talking about all of this if they're still way over here on the sidelines, right? Like super confused, not necessarily sure. And this was actually the first thing that we tackled at the Sacred Plant, is the stigma, the misinformation, the lack of clarity, and the lack of trust in the information that was out there, honestly. So really what it breaks down to is education. At the end of the day, and this is also up to the person. How much ownership are they taking in their life? Like, are they willing to say, hey, I might not know and I'm willing to know? That's another thing. Mindset is huge in everything. If you're not open to options, if you're not open to learning, you're limiting yourself. So that's kind of the door we open first, is we're like, hey, you can empower yourself. You can empower your health by just taking a peek through this door. Nobody is saying you have to walk through that door. Just know it's there and that you have the option to walk through it if you choose to. That's first step, is that nobody's forcing. This is completely your choice, and we are here to empower your choice, nothing else. And that's key, because a lot of people are like, if you don't do this, you're gonna die today. And that's not the focus. That's not even close to our focus. We want them to feel encouraged. We want them to feel like they're making this choice for themselves. So that was huge, that we have to like help them to understand, this is your choice, this is your option, and this is your choosing. So the next piece was the education piece of, you have been, we believe that we have been distracted and propagated to a certain mindset because of the propaganda of the last 100 years, right? Before early 1900s to that 1940s timeframe, before that, you would find cannabis on the pharmaceutical shelves. That it was on, in somebody's medicine cabinet. It was in, the back pocket of just ready to pull out and just kind of rub on their skin in case they had a blemish or something like that. Like, this was a very used medicine. The difference is they realized that this crop, right? And this is where we start to get into kind of like, not necessarily the theories or anything like that, but we see it in history, where very pinnacle companies were like, no, I'm going to lose money if this continues this way. So greed, power, all that fun stuff came into play. Harry Anslinger and the company that he was running with, which kind of threw everybody for a loop. He just put out there that this is bad, this is wrong. He played into the racism that was at that time, heavily played into it, the foreigner idea. It all, when you kind of look at it, you realize it had nothing to do with medicine. It had nothing to do with science. It had nothing to do with any of that. Purely had to do with social gain. And that's such an uncomfortable conversation to have. That is the hardest conversation to have. But really, when you realize that, and then you see all the research and you see expert and patient after expert and patient, they're proving that wrong every time. That's also another piece of information that people need to be aware of. Like, if you're concerned or you don't know, that's okay. Go online, and I promise you, type in cannabis research, and you'll find literally study after study of study pointing out the good and the bad, right? Because let's be real, like, we're not avoiding the fact that there is a bad side of this. People abuse everything in life. They just do. And cannabis is not one that is forgotten in that vein. So usually we see cannabis misused, and that's where you see those issues, like the frying of the brain or the lazy couch potato. It's because they have decided to abuse this plant instead of using it medicinally. So we talk about that too, because again, it's all mindset, and that's a hard conversation typically to have.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on that really quickly, because I think there are such amazing benefits. I think the education is pushing the world in favor of CBD, THC, the whole conversation, but there's still a lot of stigma, and it's still a very taboo conversation. And when people hear, well, there's all these benefits, there still can be that disconnect, because it's like, I can hear the benefits of something, but if I've been, raised to believe that this is not something that is good for me, or something that can be harmful, or something that, in society is just always looked at as a bad thing, if you will, there can be a major disconnect for people in understanding and taking in the information and really seeing how it can benefit them, being open-minded to it. And so I really just wanted to touch on that. I think it's important for people to understand there's a history with this, and it goes thousands of years back. And this is a very short-term history we're looking at in the change of mindset around this concept, around this being something that people look at from a health perspective. So when we're talking about all these health benefits, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, this is the first time you're experiencing this conversation, or maybe it's the second or third time and you're really starting to kind of perk up and listen to it, I think that it's really good to do your homework on the history in the last 100 years, what's gone on, what's happened. I think it's really important then to also understand what this can do for you, which is a lot of the things we're talking about today. But I think, that education of not only the benefits, but the education of why we are where we are at this time with it is also super important. So having said that, I just wanted to kind of make that point there, but let's get back to some of the benefits. I encourage people to go do their homework, do their research, but let's get back to some of the benefits. You talked a little bit about inflammation, which is something we talk about a lot here on the podcast. And you've talked about how, this is a plant that's really worked alongside with us for so long in ways that we don't understand, which is why it's important for people to do their homework, something that really can work naturally with the body to help us. Let's talk a little bit more about inflammation because it's such a big conversation. It's something that impacts our long-term health.
Absolutely. Really quickly, before we transition to the inflammation, you're 100% spot on. One of the things that we focus on is what is your belief currently around cannabis? Like, just throw it at us. Like, it's going to fry my brain, or it's going to, that's typically the one that people go to, is that it's going to make me dumb. I'm not going to feel like myself, and so on and so forth. So we approach that head on, and it's important to approach it head on. We're not trying to evade or disregard that very important question. So we invite it, like, what is your beliefs, and how can we help you just kind of to reframe that belief, or to see it from a different viewpoint, or to look at the research that might prove otherwise. It's not about making wrong. It's just about how can you see a different perspective. So I think that's key, is you got to pay attention to their beliefs at the get-go of it.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to inflammation, I mean, you guys talk about this tons. Inflammation has been pointed out for the last kind of about decade as being the core of most diseases. It's kind of like your first sign that something is wrong. And it typically is a sign that goes unseen for so long too. So with cannabis in particular, this is really exciting. Almost a majority of cannabinoids and terpenes actually fight inflammation head on. CBD is one of the strongest, and then you have other compounds. So we talk about CBDA, which is like the acid form. It's the existence of the molecule before it becomes CBD. THCA, CBC, CBN, CGN. Those are powerful anti-inflammatories. And when you put them together, they work even more effectively. So they're able to get into grooves in your body, like for instance, your bladder has certain pockets that fold onto itself. And when they fold onto itself, nothing is going to be able to get in there. They've been able to show that THCA is able to get in there into those pockets that we otherwise wouldn't be able to. So, and that's possible because it's working alongside the rest of the plant. So we focus on how can we reduce inflammation and optimize. Inflammation is still necessary. It's still important, right? When you cut your hand, inflammation heals it. So we don't want to completely remove our inflammation response. We want to optimize it. And so the way that we do this is adding in cannabis. And then in turn, it helps the signaling, the on and off switch, right? Like turn that inflammation on or turn it off. Or, hey, no more inflammation. We also need to reduce that pain signal because it's causing more inflammation to go there too. So that's another body signal. So you want to reduce the pain signal, reduce the inflammation in the area itself, and help the core issue, aka the processes that are broken that led to that. So let's say, for instance, that cancer is a big one. So I'll kind of lean into cancer because it is also one of the most studied in regards to cannabis, which is great because cancer impacts a lot of people. I think it's 1 in 3, right? So when it comes to cancer, there is a part of your process in your cells that just kind of teeters, and then over time it mutates, and then all of a sudden you're left with these mutated cancerous cells. At some point, your process broke inside of your cell, right? So cannabis is going to come in and help repair that process, almost supplement that process, and help, kick that apoptosis back on, kick that lymphatic drainage back on, kick that kind of revitalizing new cells. All those processes that are all turned off when inflammation goes excessively too high is going to kick right back on. So that's important because then you get rid of those cancer cells because they're killing themselves off. They're not spreading throughout the body. And on top of that, they're not causing other inflammation in different parts of our body, such as our organs, our joints, our muscles, our bones. So it's really helping bring our processes back to optimization.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast could go on for hours. I think talk about all the benefits that can come from CBD, THC, cannabis, the sacred plant, all of it. We could go on forever, and the list is really long. It's you almost don't want to go into it all, because then people won't believe how many things it can actually help and the things it can do. So I'd like to encourage everybody that's listening to go check out your website to learn a lot more. You can go to thesacredplant.com, and they've already done a lot of the research for you and can deliver it to you, I think, in a very clean and concise way. You guys also have a really amazing, really dense special report that talks about cannabis and cancer, correct?
Yes.
So you can go to thesacredplant.com/EYO, stands for Empowering You Organically, EYO, and you can get that whole report absolutely free as well. So I think there's, again, I'd love to have you back on. We can continue the conversation another time and maybe break it down into more digestible bites for people, right? Yeah. Now is the overview. We can come back. We can talk more about cancer specific. We can talk about anxiety specifically. We can talk about inflammation, all of those different things to really deliver the information and give it the attention that it deserves, because it really is a phenomenal plant. So, and really quickly, before we wrap up, I know that Terry Ann loves to ask one final question, so I'm gonna let her go in and do that now.
Everybody gets this question. Yeah, so Leah, if you could leave one message with the world and the people listening to our podcast, what would you say to them?
Oh, that is hard. Probably because I have like 1,000 different messages I think everybody absolutely has to hear. I think the absolute number one message is that you have options. You 1,000,000% have options. Options in every part of your life that you may not even be imagining. All you have to do is just expand your awareness. What does that mean? Just open a book, read an article, hear out a friend. Any of those things is expanding your awareness, and that will lead you to see so many different options. I was one of those people, and I am so grateful that I realized that options and options and options were out there, and I just had to pick one. That was it.
I think that's a really important message in the world that we live in today too. So I appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, I think too often are we forced what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to believe, and, you know, follow along these lines and those lines. And I think just what you said, options is really what matters. And listen, we're all in control of our own bodies and our own health. And it's up to you if you're going to be ignorant or not, and not explore all the different options and look at what can actually make you healthier and what can't. So I love that answer. Absolutely. Leah, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure having you on the show.
Grateful to be here. I really am. I'm excited. A little nervous, but still really excited to be here.
I know the feeling 100%. I still get nervous before doing these, and we're on like podcast 100 or getting close to it. So for those of you listening, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. You can go to empoweringyouorganically.com, get all of the show notes from the show here with Leah, links to their free report, links to their website, links to other studies. You can watch this podcast again. Tons of stuff there for you at Empowering You Organically. Again, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Terry Ann. Thank you, Leah. And we will see you on the next show.
Thanks, everyone.